Everybody, thank you very much for coming to this joint session of the Work and Pensions and Treasury Select Committee on Motability. We're going to start obviously with the report that the National Audit Office has provided to the committees. Can I ask the witnesses just to introduce themselves very briefly? So Amias.
My name is Amias Morse. I'm the Comptroller and Auditor General.
Thank you. Ms. Bailey.
I'm Louise Blayton. I'm a Value for Money Director at the National Audit Office.
Thank you. Ms. Smith.
And I'm Stephen Smith, an Executive Leader of the National Audit Office.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed for your report. In it you stated that Motorability Operations had generated an unplanned profit, and I quote, driven by inaccuracy in its forecast value of vehicles, which is typically lower than the wider market average. And that generated £826 million of total unplanned profit. So is the conclusion of the NAO that Motorability Operations is deliberately undervaluing customers' cars and therefore overcharging customers? So Amias.
I think the conclusion's not as stark as that, Chair. What we've seen based on the evidence is that there is a very prudent valuation practice, and more prudent than normal. In the industry. Does that mean that it's as a result of that there's probably arguably some cost that's passed on to lessors, car lessors that might not have been, but I wouldn't say is it a deliberate plan to enable more to be charged? I'm not suggesting that. I think what it's rather more about is having a super prudent attitude, which is reflected in quite a lot of the way the business is set up, and which doesn't really quite justify based on the results over the last many years now.
But have you ever seen such a significant level of unplanned profit over a period of 10 years, which is what your report has identified?
Well, if I say have I ever, can I just say there are so many. There are some quite unique features to the Motability Operations, and they're very much acknowledged. And you will see in our report. If I just for a second quote from the chairman in his correspondence, which we reproduce in our report, where he says, in many respects, Motability Operations is a unique organisation. In many respects, it's free of competition and enjoys a captive customer base in a relatively stable environment with almost zero credit risk in relation to lease rental income. So when you have something like that and you have a very prudent stance, it's on both risk and on stock valuation, it's likely that if there's a variation in any direction, it will be in the upside direction. And indeed, Motorability Operations have advised the charity to expect a series of substantial overperformances in terms of available donations over the next few years. So they are thinking forward to that.
I think you recommend in the report that Motorability Operations should review its approach to forecasting so they can better understand. Perhaps you could just expand on that remark. I'm not sure who's the best person to do that.
Well, I think one has to start by recognising that the market has been particularly strong in used car values for the last few years. However, as you said, what we've seen that in looking at the price, the residual values that they're pricing into the leases, they have been consistently more cautious than other market participants, and therefore our recommendation, as you rightly say, is that they should look at why it is they are consistently being more conservative than both in terms of other market participants and in terms of realised prices, bearing in mind the fact they do put a significant amount of effort into assessing the residual values.
And what about, I think your report states on average 43% of the cost of a lease is the car's depreciation. Yep. Is there an issue with the overestimation of the depreciation costs, and what does that mean for customers?
So the The depreciation cost is struck after taking into account the residual value, and so therefore, if you like, the lower the residual value, the higher the depreciation charge. And we have estimated that as a consequence, customers over the 10-year period to 2017 were overcharged by 390 million.
And when we say customers here, as the my fellow chair has just whispered into my ear, we're really talking about taxpayers, aren't we?
Well, we're talking about the people who are leasing cars.
We're talking about people who qualify for mobility allowance.
But ultimately, who's paying the mobility allowance?
Well, perhaps this is a way to look at it. That's true, the government is paying the mobility allowance. But once having awarded it, the person who's receiving it is entitled to the full allowance.
Absolutely, of course.
So if you assign the allowance to Motability, then the customer, then essentially, but the individual who's entitled to the mobility allowance is the customer.
But if you're the DWP looking at estimating mobility allowance costs going forward, wanting there to be sufficient money for people to be able to make the choices to use an excellent scheme like Motorability,
yes,
then obviously you will be looking at the costs that Motorability has been charging, and one of those will be going back to, obviously, is one of the costs is depreciation, and you're saying that customers have been overcharged, which must eventually lead back to the taxpayer.
That's true, but bear in mind also that the Motability arrangements are complex. So on the one hand, you might argue for, and we haven't made a great point of saying that this overcharge is a systemic or deliberate thing. And the reason we don't do that is because later on, when the customer changes their car, they tend to get very generous good condition bonuses and things of that sort. So they get quite a lot of financial assistance.
Oh, yeah.
And so taking it overall, we think that there's a very heavy discount. If you compare what a person with a mobility allowance pays compared to what they might pay in an ordinary leasing company, we think they're getting a discount of something like 40%. Yeah. So I wouldn't go away too far with the idea that this is there's a general overcharging of customers through the system as a whole. I don't think that's quite right.
Amias, I mean, all of us agree that this is a terrific scheme. No question about that. What we're looking at is the financing of it.
Yes.
And whether taxpayers can get a better deal.
Yes, that's right.
And one is whether, in fact, there's too much being charged by the company for the product which they're giving. And secondly, whether in fact more people might not prefer to keep their cars rather than be bribed, subsidised to fit the company policy.
That's
so we're thinking about future developments. Nobody wants in any way to disrupt the scheme or to criticise it. It's been a wonderful initiative for people with disabilities, but it doesn't necessarily follow that means it must be value for money for taxpayers.
No.
And the questions we've all got in different ways we're going to ask: couldn't we get this scheme for less money?
Well, shall I just? I think it's worthwhile seeing it in sort of, if I can, in fairly simple terms. There is a contribution. Some of the contribution isn't something that costs taxpayers money, which is giving the direct assignation of the mobility allowance gives cash flow assurance. And in addition to that, there's the exemption from VAT, which is of very considerable value. That really is costing taxpayers something. You can certainly say that. But also, when income from whatever source, when income flows into Motability operations, some of it is recycled into the rates that lessors pay for cars. Some of it goes into improving services, and some of it goes into making charitable donations to Motability charity, and some of it goes to meet the costs of the operation. So you can't. Clearly, if in any area the costs are higher than they could or should be, then evidently that's money that is not being spent on providing or improving the services or providing charitable donations. So in some ways it's worth looking at it that way and saying the actual costs of running this operation need to be optimised against what's being delivered. And that, and obviously you'll appreciate that that includes remuneration.
Let me just...
Can I just...
Yeah.
But do you think an organisation which is totally dependent on taxpayers' money should also then be deciding that some of that money should go to charity? I'm not saying the charity is wrong or it doesn't do great things, but I find that a rather strange state of affairs. Do you?
Well, I would just say that I think that was what was envisaged when the scheme was set up in the way it is. It was envisaged that there'd be a degree of bringing private sector skills into the picture. It wasn't simply a question of saying, well, we just want you to break even. The desire to run a successful, to bring business skills to running a successful operation was part of the original concept. I know you'll hear a lot more about that from Lord Stirling, but I think it's fair to say the interesting thing about the Motorability project was that it sought to harness business skills alongside
skills
providing
or
a public.
pay, Amias?
Sorry?
Harness business skills or pay.
We're going to come on to that. Well, let's come on to pay in a moment. But I just wanted to just very briefly, yeah.
Amias, the organisation benefits from, I think you said, £888 million worth of tax benefits a year. Presumably the logic of giving those tax benefits was they were needed to make this scheme viable, not to make the scheme hugely profitable or be able to give charitable donations. I mean, is your view that the criteria that the Treasury and HMRC use to give such tax exemptions is actually being met here, or is that not a
I don't think it's being reassessed for a long time. And one of our recommendations is that all needs to be considered. So this report is actually addressed, I was called upon to do this report by government. Yeah. So the report is addressed to government, and what we think that government needs to consider the basis on which it participates.
But when you're auditing HMRC or the Treasury, are you going to be concerned that there's 888 million worth of tax benefits being granted without really any understanding whether they're actually needed to achieve the aims of that organisation? Is that an issue that you would want to now take up when you audit HMRC or the Treasury?
Quite possibly.
And I think we've said in previous reports when we've looked at those kind of issues that regular review of those kind of arrangements is important. So that's something we've said in our past work. But I think it's important to note that with the tax concessions of the 44% cheaper leases, we're saying in the report that about 2/5 of that is accounted for by the tax concessions. The other 3/5 is perhaps more indirect in terms of the scale of economy and the kind of substantial discounts that Motability Operations is able to get based and building on the tax concessions.
Okay, so let me just move on, because I'm conscious of time and I want to bring Catherine in. And one of the other areas that you mentioned in your report was the one-off £400 million donation by Motorability Operations to Motability, which appears to be just Motorability Operations passing on its reserves to Motability for them to use as reserves. Can you unravel that for us?
Well, Motability as a charity has presumably an obligation, and one of the things we comment on is it's not clear to us that they have a long-term strategy for what they will do in terms of planned donations coming out of if they're going to receive a consistent pattern of substantial contributions from Motorability Operations, which they expect to do, then they should be able to show us that they have a strategy for use of that. And then the other question is, if there's such substantial sums going to be paid into the charity, is government happy that they have a sufficient say in what will happen to that, or are they happy for the charity trustees to make those decisions on their own account?
Well, let me at that point bring Catherine in.
Yeah, because the £400 million is 14 times Motability's annual spending. So I appreciate the Audit Office report has asked it to it should develop a long-term strategy based on a broad and open consultation to set out how it's planning to spend that money. But do you think it's realistic to expect Motability to be able to spend that money effectively and efficiently?
Well, why don't you say something about the endowment fund?
So what we've seen is with the 400 million coming in September of last year, the plans that Motability has looked at in terms of how they might spend that money, currently forecasting that those sort of plans might cost about 100 million a year for the next 5 years. But on the basis that they're also expecting 100 million in, you've effectively got a sort of surplus fund of money. And we say in the report it's about 500 to 600 million. So effectively that is sitting there with the flow in and the flow out. That potentially remains as it is.
I think the other point to make
So the answer is no.
Well, we haven't seen plans to use that scale of money.
We deliberately make that point, but it's not clear to us that there's a strategy for using that substantial amount of money.
Do you want, yeah.
Sorry, I think I was just going to make the point that, that firstly that the 400 million was just paid out of the 2018 profits of Motorability Operations with 100 million left over. And then secondly, on the basis of the fact that with the exception of 2 years, one of which was 2008 when they still made a profit, they've always made more than 200 million a year. So this is a kind of, it's not just how do you spend the 400 million, it's how you're going to deal with the future profits that Motorability Operations are likely to make subject to a
And I think
shock.
that people listening to this will be scratching their heads because, I mean, last month the Work and Pensions Committee took evidence that 75,000 disabled people have lost their Motability vehicle as a result of the government's transfer from DLA to PIP. And given that figure is likely to continue, I don't know if you've done an assessment of the number to be affected by 2020, but but ultimately this doesn't seem to be a problem that is going to go away. It just seems to be an issue that's going to get bigger for the charity to be able, and the number of people that they are supporting.
I think that's right. In fairness, I would say that the charity has provided some transitional support to people affected or in transition on PIP, and they'll tell you that, I'm sure. But I do think there's a basic problem, which is if this scheme works for you, you get a fantastic deal. Mm. If it doesn't work for you for any reason, what sort of deal do you get? And we still find it mysterious, and this is as much a comment for government as it is for Motability. We find it mysterious that there really isn't an understanding of why more people don't sign up for this scheme, given that it's such a good deal, and whether those people who have mobility or qualify for mobility allowance but who aren't members of the scheme should be getting some ability to participate. That's something the committee might consider.
Well, in terms of the
benefits,
the transfer of those, the unplanned profit and it transferring into charitable donations means that, and one of the issues is the forecast in the value of cars, which you've identified already, and it means that customers have been charged £390 million more than was required in their lease agreements. So in effect, disabled people who have been overcharged in the Motability Operations are now, is it not that they're now effectively subsidising other disabled people in order to then receive from the charitable arm?
I think the 390 is a significant number accrued over quite a long number of years.
It's accrued over 10 years, so obviously if one takes that into a per year basis, it's a lot less. And I think it's more the way, if you have a systemic conservatism, the way it compounds up.
But in terms of the question I asked,
yes.
Is it not that the disabled people are effectively
in any
subsidising
case,
towards a charitable donation towards other disabled people?
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah.
If you said the mission here is to run this on a basis which is a break-even basis, you could probably provide this service for less than the whole mobility allowance, I suspect.
Okay.
I suspect, I'd be interested to hear what Motability Operations has to say about that, but I suspect they wouldn't really disagree with that concept.
And then one other issue that's been raised with me by constituents is the very high advance fee that Motability Operations customers have to pay. The minimum is £300, I understand, and that's a lot of money for somebody to find on who's receiving in receipt of PIP. Is that something that you've looked at, that perhaps should be part of the considerations in terms of how this money would be better spent?
So we did look at this, and I mean what we found is that under the scheme there were kind of three options. There's paying an advance payment, so you can effectively get a better car. You can take a car that is at the kind of level of the mobility allowance, so you kind of never see a refund or a payment, or a small number of people choose leases that are less than that, so that they're getting a bit back each week from the mobility allowance. But the vast majority of customers are opting to make that advance payment, and that ranges depending on what kind of car you're trying to get to. What we were interested in is any kind of research, I suppose, about, you know, what are the incentives for people? What does that mean about the kind of customer base, I suppose, because 85% of those are able to make that advance payment somehow to afford those cars.
I think it's probably fair to say that there are about 300 cars that can be got without having to make an advance payment. So it's an important KPI for Motorability Operations.
Okay. Charlie?
Yes, can I ask you about remuneration, so the pay of the top brass? It says here, in recent years, the charity has become concerned about the reputational consequences of high pay, and they were particularly concerned because they said Motorability Operations executives managed a monopoly, and so they were not responsible for growing the business in a highly difficult and competitive environment. And they also said the executive is only one step removed from public service, given the scheme's turnover is so dependent on public funding and is in receipt of significant tax concessions. Do you think that charity is right to be concerned that the top brass are overpaid?
Okay. Yes, I think they're certainly entitled to be concerned, and I think, if I understand, and we deliberately put some of the correspondence into the report. I think the first question is there reputation? Are there reputational issues around this? And the answer to that is clearly there have been sustained reputational issues. The reason we decided to accept the call that we should do this, which is outside our remit, is we don't think these issues will go away unless there's some change.
Yeah.
So that's why we've stepped forward to do this report. If I compare the level of pay with the BBC or other semi-public bodies, very substantial bodies, it's clear that the pay is at a higher level than that. We say that in our report.
So they're paid even more than the BBC?
Well, they are paid more than the BBC.
Gosh,
but then
that's a lot, isn't it?
But I'm quite sure that Motability would say, well, I'm not necessarily saying it's a lot, but it's just more, and it's more than Chief Executive of Crossrail. So equally, I'm quite sure that you can.
That is
Sorry?
More than the chief
More than the chief exec of Crossrail.
Network rail. Excuse me, wrong word.
Still, thank you.
Obviously, much more reassurance, actually, but yes, okay.
I agree with that. Sorry, wrong phrase.
So they're paid truly eye-watering sums. Do carry on, please.
But they would say, and not unreasonably, our scheme has been to try and produce a pay structure that will attract the best talent from industry. So it needs to compare with what leading industry performers would get, or let's say FTSE 250 executives. That's what they're aiming to do in the pay scheme. So in a way, looking at that, I would say, normally the bonus structure that you see in place, if it's going to be motivational rather than simply part of the base pay package, it needs to be something which won't be achieved on every occasion, certainly not achieved to the maximum. What we actually found was, over the life of the reward scheme, over 90% of the available bonuses have been achieved every year. So it's difficult to see that as having been something that induced extra effort. We feel that it turned into, or you could take a view that this is really more or less part of the basic expectations, because it went on for such a long time at such a high level of performance.
So it looks like there are, if I understand correctly, that there would seem to be some quite serious governance failings, because it also says, as you just said, all of the performance targets for these bonuses were achieved in all years of the scheme's operations, and the total value of benefits paid out between 2011 and 2017 under the scheme was £15.3 million, a fourfold increase at a time when the general population have hardly seen a pay rise at all. Do you think that that is justifiable?
Well, I'm clearly putting it forward as something which I think needs to be reviewed by government at a fundamental level. Is this okay? Given government's key part in enabling Motability operations to exist. Personally, I think there has to be some. There's a question about how effective governance input has. You see the record that there's been a challenge under the governance system. It's had some effect, but not a full effect. I think that's fair to say. How do we get to a position where the governance really has got control, where governance input from the charity, if that's how it continues to be, has really got a grip on the level of pay being delivered?
And do you have recommendations on that?
We think a basic review of the relationship between the charity and Motability operations needs to take place.
We also say there that we think there's a review needed of the performance framework, because as you rightly say, that was put in place, I think, in 2008 for the long-term incentive plan, at a point when the business had been through a turnaround, but the objectives were set at a lower, for excellent objectives, were set at a lower level than had already been achieved. So that's what we think needs to be looked at. So that's that performance framework, to make sure it genuinely is stretching.
And the other thing I noticed here was this question of whether there was transparency. The report says that the Chief Executive continues to benefit from separate and additional remuneration arrangements, the full value of which has not been previously disclosed. Is it hidden?
Well, let me just distinguish between two different things here. One of them is the question of what the law requires in terms of corporate reporting, and we're not suggesting, and what has been disclosed in the past has been within the minimum level of disclosure, but legal, and therefore we don't challenge that. And we note that in the last year, the disclosure has increased. The disclosure in the accounts of Motability operations has increased a lot, so quite clearly it's possible to disclose more, and Motability operations are now doing so. But that's the corporate reporting obligations. The other question for the committee to consider is, when you were having an evidence session with Motability and discussing pay, were they frank with you? That's not to be confused with the question of were they complying with their statutory obligations in terms of public reporting of pay. Those are two different subjects, and the committee is the best judge of whether you feel that they were frank with you in what they said. What they didn't do at the time of the hearing was to bring out that hard number. Subsequently, they made a written submission to you, and they refer to the fact that those payments may continue to rise. They don't actually give a hard number there either, I don't think.
So the written submission you got afterwards was very long, and so it is quite in the depths of that where we've got this. What they actually disclosed at that point was, as at 2010, what they expected the Chief Executive's scheme to be worth in 2015. By that time, I think March 2018 last year, there was an actual number known. So reasonably, that could have been the number that was disclosed.
So how much open with this, were they?
You didn't get the number at the time that we have put in our report and is now disclosed in Motability Operations accounts for 2018.
How much is this hidden money?
So it's an arrangement for the Chief Executive, which is at the end of 2018 was worth 1.86 million. We say in our report that if that continues until 2022, it would be worth 2.2 million.
final.
So, well, and I just want to pick up on this
Yeah.
because I think this is really important. So we're talking about £2 million of money which is not disclosed, and you say frank, and whether you're frank with the committee, but let me just ask about the legal position of this. The Large and Medium-Sized Companies and Groups Accounts and Reports Regulations 2008, which I'm sure everyone's an expert, requires the aggregate amount of remuneration paid to or receivable by directors in respect of qualifying services to be shown. Did Motability Operations comply with this regulations if the money is owed? If the money is owed to the Chief Executive in respect of the long-term incentives was not included in the accounts? What's the law broken?
So our understanding is that in interpreting those requirements, the kind of operative word is receivable. So Motability Operations' judgment was that that money, at that point, wasn't receivable. That's the judgment that they made.
And one last thing. Samis, you said in response to Catherine's questions, you said that they could provide, if they were very efficient, they could provide for less than the allowance their services, if I understood correctly. Could taxpayers actually get a better deal out of this? And could taxpayer money then be used to provide greater help in other areas to disabled people?
We are, in some ways, the answer to that may be yes, but can I just take a second to record the fact that we're talking about a success? And it's very seductive to start picking a success to pieces. And therefore, I'm just going to say that to you. The reason we're having this conversation is because this has been much more successful than anybody expected after some years, and I know you'll hear all about this later, of quite a long period when it didn't work very well. Yeah. So it's actually a success. Yeah. And now we have prolonged success now means that we have different issues to deal with and we need to address them. So rather than seeing, I don't see it so much as, could now that we know that this can be done and that it works this way, could we press down on the margins and the costs? I think that's a reasonable challenge to make. If we did any more work on this and we have a mandate for 3 years, we might look at the cost structures and so forth and see where they are. But should they have already done all that? I'm not sure that I'm even saying that, but I believe now we're looking at a sustained success, kicking out substantial over-profits, when it's not unreasonable to say, well, can we squeeze down on that and run a leaner operation and deliver more back into the public sector?
I think that's a very fair point. Can I very briefly pick up on that? Because it's a monopoly position, it's doing very well because it's run efficiently. And yes, it's a success, but like all monopolies, are they not better regulated so that the amount of value can therefore be managed properly, like has happens with the utility industry?
That's one. That is certainly one possibility.
Okay, yes. When you talk about squeeze, we're talking about a salary which is 10 times the Prime Minister's.
An overall package.
I was talking about squeezing the whole cost structure, right. Not just. So sorry. I'd moved on from. Although the salary is important, if you're asking the strategic questions, it's just a feature of the situation. The really important point is the relationship between how much does it cost to run this operation and what does it deliver.
It's the outward visible sign of what's going on beneath it all, isn't it?
Thank you very much. And carrying on with that theme of value for money, as you say, Motorability Operations enjoys very considerable levels of customer satisfaction, extremely high, and they've invested very heavily in that. It's the customer support has almost trebled from 2008. Would you say but it's not delivered a great deal more customer satisfaction because it's high anyway? Does that seem that that's value for money in that amount of customer support being offered?
Stephen, why don't you answer that?
So I think you're right to say that when you're delivering that level of customer service and customer satisfaction, then there's a risk that kind of additional spend becomes a nugatory. And what we found was we could not identify any framework that Motability Ops used to satisfy itself that this additional investment was delivering value for money. And therefore, one of our recommendations is that they should institute such a framework that takes into account the alternative uses of the funds within the scheme as a whole.
Okay, thank you. And obviously we wouldn't be arguing against high levels of customer satisfaction, particularly the customers who are involved, who are often quite difficult to work with. Insurance, since they took over in 2013, I noticed that the average is around about £800 a year, which seems quite high for cars which have a relatively low mileage and a very low customer risk profile. Did you look into the value for money on the insurance side?
No, we did not. But it's probably but it is fair to say that when Motability talks about the package being 44% cheaper than the wider market, that takes into account the totality of the package, including insurance, including roadside assistance, including servicing costs.
It's also worth just bearing in mind that when you're talking about insuring people who with special needs and possibly with some unusual insurance characteristics, so going to the market might not be easy for this sort of insurance.
Okay, that's accepted, but the market might be making high profits out of such people,
sure,
as well as is often the case with insurance and people with illnesses and disabilities, unfortunately.
So can I just make one point on the insurance, which is that the Motability have substantially taken on insurance risk themselves, except for claims in excess of 25,000, which they've reinsured, and so therefore to the extent that loss experience is less than that reflected in the lease pricing, then that will flow back into the profits of this scheme as a whole.
Right, okay. Which brings me on to reserves to look at as well, because essentially the profits are going into reserves, which have increased by fivefold since 2008. At the same time, customers have just increased by 20%. You did remark on the reserves that you felt that Motability should commission some external benchmarking on the levels of reserves that are held by Motorability Operations. Should it be for Motability to be doing that?
Well, I think it's the sort of thing that you'd expect an operation to do, and you'd expect the governance in the operation and the board of the operation to say, is this an appropriate level of reserves, or is it necessary to carry this level of reserve? Is this really reflected in the risk experience that you need to carry these level of reserves? I mean, I appreciate that the reserves represent cars, not money, but nonetheless, this level of reserve is much higher than we see in other car leasing companies. And considering what we said before about the low risk and the low risk on renewal and so forth, and the relatively monopolistic nature of this, it seems surprising to us.
And I think also the very success of Motorability Operations in managing the risks that they've taken on does suggest that the prudence that might have been appropriate when they first took on these risks is less justified now.
The insurance would be a good example of that. A risk that they have taken on, which might have meant in the past that they would need to increase reserves, but now, when you're in a more stable position, that's less justified.
So they're putting a lot of money into customer service, customer support, without particular satisfaction back, and the reserves are skyrocketing, as well as executive pay. Shouldn't the company simply be reducing the prices?
Reducing
Reducing their prices.
Well, that may be one way of doing it, or you could say instead of assigning the whole of the mobility allowance, you don't need to assign all of it to get this deal. There are things like that could be done. When you look at Motability, looking into the future and saying, unless we change something in this model, it's going to continue to kick out a lot of extra value. And by the way, if we then adjust the pay and everything else, it might kick out more. Assuming it continues to be successful, then where do we want that value to go? That's a discussion that government needs to participate in. And it is just worth noticing, government used to be more involved in the Motability than it is now. It's really hardly involved at all now. And I think they need to recognise that they're a major underwriter, albeit not an explicit stakeholder, and they need to take a much more active part in this, in shaping the future, and then in being part of guiding that future forward.
Thank you. That wasn't explicitly part of your report and recommendations, either on government's role explicitly or on price reductions. Was that not? Why was that the
Well,
case?
not because we're shy of saying things like that, but because it's one specific. Reducing prices is one specific option. Mm-hmm. There are no. If you say there's a lot of excess value being generated here, you could reduce prices, or you could decide, well, what we want to do is to spread some benefit to other people who qualify for mobility allowance. There are quite a lot of options, and we really haven't got involved in running the options debate. We think that government needs to decide how are we going to take this forward, and to the extent we can help them with that in that debate, we're willing to do so.
And we have got a couple of recommendations for the government in the report about, reviewing the value and impact of the support they provide, and having some clarity about their, what they think mobility allowances should be about. So that's important. And we have another recommendation about the government's role in helping Motability Operations and Motability understand about the kind of wider potential customer base and why some people don't get involved in the scheme.
Yes, could I just ask one small question? That's you said that the majority of customers pay an advance payment before their lease. Does Motability offer end-of-lease cars to customers at a discount, which would give them another option, but one that didn't tie them into Motability?
I think as we kind of referred to earlier, that the scheme kind of runs on a kind of very limited package. So it's a 3-year lease, 60,000 miles. I think typically those options aren't available. The idea at the end of the lease is if you want another car that you would take out another lease on a different car. I think there are some odd examples in terms of very adapted wheelchair accessible vehicles that can run for a longer than a 3-year lease. I think there's some particular terms for those very specialised vehicles, but generally speaking it's this kind of one package that Motability Operations offers.
Okay, thank you. Just that we heard in the previous session that those adaptations are all ripped out and then the cars are put on the market, which seems to be pretty wasteful when you've got customers who could use them and be given first offer on those vehicles.
But 95% are not adapted at all, is that not right?
Sorry, 95%?
95% of the cars aren't adapted anyway.
Most aren't adapted, and the adaptions that are offered as part of the kind of standard package, they're sort of free of charge anyway. Those are kind of standard. So it might be things like having an automatic, if that makes it easier for you to drive, things like that.
But it may be. I mean, when you take that point, as I'm sure you will with Motorability Operations, they will probably say to you, well, look, we're able to get cars at this discount because we agree we're going to hold them for a certain period of time. We can put them back into the second-hand market at a reasonable price at this stage. If we hold them for longer, they'll drop in value a great deal more. So they will have arguments about why it makes sense to run the scheme the way they do, and and it's probably a lot simpler to run if you're just running one scheme, one models of scheme, I would guess.
Okay. Heidi.
Thank you. So just following on neatly from that about how involved government has been so far and whether that needs to change, just remind us, to set the scene again, how much financial support the government does give to Motability, directly and indirectly.
Go ahead.
So the financial support is not direct, it's in the form of tax concessions, and in our report we've estimated that in 2017 the maximum of that was 888 million for the year. Okay. And that's made up of various types of VAT exemptions and insurance premium tax.
I mean, you could argue, and it's, whose money is it? Taxpayers, the recipients of PIP, DLA, etc. That is public money, that is government money that comes from taxpayers too. I want to explore the monopoly concept and whether it's time to let other competitors come into the field. I don't think that was something you put in your report as a conclusion. What's your? Do you have a view on that? Is it, would Motability not be able to operate as well if there were competitors, their credit rating, etc.?
Well, I think it's fair to look at it like this. One, there's a tax concession, and there is also the relative monopoly position, and there's the direct payment of mobility allowance from government into Motability, supposing the customer decides to take a lease. There's no credit risk. So these are the big advantages. If you decided that you wanted to have effective competition, in order to make Motability more accessible to competition by the rest of the industry, what you'd have to do is to take some of those advantages away. Because right now, people could take a mobility allowance and go and get a lease somewhere else. It's just that they'd be pretty stupid to do that with a 40% discount on cost. So the only way, if you said, we want to have a more open market, you'd have to decide, well, this is going to mean, to some extent, more expensive leases for people on mobility allowance. So you'd be taking away, in order to create competition. I don't have in my mind a model where you can let other people dip into these advantages.
Why not?
Well, that's interesting. We just haven't thought about how that could be done.
Because if this is a sector that government decides it wants to back because it's, for vulnerable people, etc., if those advantages were made available, why on earth, what I'm trying to get at is, would competition, if that were a level playing field, would that drive ultimately prices down for these consumers that need these cars?
Well, I think it could do, but then the kind of opposite argument for that is that part of the reason Motorability Operations can get a 44% discount is because of the big economies of scale as one kind of company doing this they can get. So the opposite side of that would be that you potentially lose some of that because you wouldn't have necessarily those economies of scale operating.
Is there any analysis that's been done around what the sweet spot is? Two operators in the field, 3 operators in the field, that economies of scale. Do we know?
We haven't done it as part of this piece of work.
Is it something that government should look at? Is it something that...
Well, I think they should certainly look at... You raise a good challenge, which is there a completely different model for providing this? And I think it's reasonable to look at that. However, I'm going to repeat, it's nice to have a problem based on success to talk about. So I'm not in a big hurry to say, why don't we see if we can fiddle around with this model and make it completely different, and whoops, we're back to having the story of failure that there was before. So I would just honestly be fairly prudent about it. I'm not saying, would we look at it? Yes, of course, but are we looking at it with very strong expectation of completely changing? That might be appropriate if you thought that this was really this current model was doing a really bad job. But what we've tried to say in this report is, in many ways, this is a success. There are things that, as a result of success, sustained success, now need fixing. We don't think either the charity or Motorability Operations has moved far enough in response to its success. Right. That's really our message.
And I think it's worthwhile saying that it's success both financially, as we talked about, but also in terms of the customer experience, in terms of all of the feedback that we've seen.
And that's important.
I need to speak up a little bit, because I think I can see that people in the public gallery are straining to... Hey, you've got to project backwards as well, unfortunately, in this room.
So just to repeat
Oh,
that.
sorry. What I said was we're talking about success not just financially, but also in terms of the customer experience, sort of in terms of all of the feedback that we've seen.
And it needs to be easy for those people that need those cars. It shouldn't be
Absolutely.
difficult suddenly.
Yeah.
So speak.
Do you want to ask about the beneficiaries? Because I'm conscious of time.
Yes,
Going to move on.
just one really, really fast, plainly speaking question. So are you saying we should be tweaking, or we can't tweak, can we? We should be encouraging the government to look at the remuneration, the whole profitability, the whole cycle of money between the operations and the charity, rather than breaking the competition model and encouraging other operators to come in?
That's, if you ask me for a conclusion, yes, okay. I'd say that's true. I think this is an unusual enough model within government that saying, oh, why don't we just get rid of it for not any particularly good reason, I wouldn't do that. I think you need to look at what you need is a much more muscular governance model that really means you've got a grip of what's going on.
We need one of those.
And muscular, exactly. And that government itself is really awake to this stuff.
Do we need the banks in this model?
Well, they provided a useful base for being able to for Motability being able to borrow at good rates. So I don't think, again we haven't put a finding in this report that says we don't think you need the banks. And again, I think it does underpin
the charge.
Sorry?
The charge that the banks make on the scheme. Another bit of money for old rope, isn't it?
It's money for money.
Well, there are two components to it. One is in terms of kind of for the remuneration of the preference shares, which is about 700,000. Another is the management fee for 745,000, and the major component is in terms of the interest and capital market fees earned, which is about 17 million.
Heidi.
So again, just very finally for me, something we've touched on a little bit already. Given this slightly unusual relationship between government, the operations and the charity, we're still not accessing all the people out there who might need and like a car. DWP sort of gets a little bit involved in sending leaflets out. How should that work better?
I think there were very funny mixed messages. So Motorability was asked to investigate why more people weren't taking part in the scheme. They haven't made
36%, I think, is it? 36%.
36%,
yeah. They haven't made an awful lot of progress in that, nor have they been very vigorously assisted by government. I think it's probably fair.
I think, yes, because ultimately it would need the Department for Work and Pensions to make their data about people who receive mobility allowances available.
And we're content with that. If we're concluding that we're broadly happy with the model, we don't want competition to come in, then that data should be shared.
So when we asked the department why they hadn't been able to make that available, and it largely comes down to kind of GDPR type concerns about that sort of making that data more widely available.
But although there's nothing to stop government carrying out this exercise themselves, and that might be better than asking the provider to analyse why people aren't buying their services. It might be better for government to do this themselves and say, we need to, in order to carry out our role as a stakeholder here, we need to understand why this isn't happening. Because they're more likely to get the full range of messages that way.
And that goes back to your earlier point, doesn't it, about maybe it's time for government to get a little bit more involved in how the whole thing's operating?
I think so.
Okay. Right, thank you.
Just before I finish, is there anything else? I mean, you've produced a very comprehensive report. You've given us some very good pointers this morning for further questioning of our next witnesses. Is there anything else that we haven't covered, to Amias and your team, that you wanted to bring to the committee's attention before we finish? No.
I mean, I have nothing other than just to re-emphasise one thing to you, which is these issues aren't going to go away without significant change in the way this is operating. It's valuable, there's a success, but there does need to be change.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much indeed to all of you for being here this morning. We are going to just stop for a moment while we swap chairs and swap panels, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome again, Lord Stirling. Might you identify yourself for the sake of the record?
Geoffrey Stirling, and in this case, Chairman of Motability, the charity, and the co-founder with the late Goodman.
Good morning, I'm Paul Atkinson, I'm the Director of Motorability.
Lord Stirling, why is it when we ask for a copy of the governance review, you've only sent us a summary of that, and you're not anxious for the review to be published?
Before I comment on that, Chairs, I do want to make this point. First of all, on behalf of everybody involved in the scheme, I wanted to say how much we appreciated Sir Araminus's comments on the excellence of the scheme and the quality of the management. And it is worth reminding all of us that we've actually now served 5 million people, 5 million families on the way to freedom since this all started many, many years ago. And service and the anxiety of having an enduring long-term capability is really what it's all about. I hope you didn't mind my bringing that up, that it is the quality of it, but I do understand, was listening very carefully to the points which the controller was making just now, and of course we have accepted all their recommendations. I hope you didn't mind my making
No, Lord Stirling,
right.
It's quite possible, it's proper for us both to thank you for initiating this, but also to say that the Comptroller and Auditor General said that things should change.
We have accepted all the recommendations of both organisations. And it is how the scheme works together, which is really a key factor, which we're very willing, obviously, to explain why we do things in certain ways.
Right, but you were
so coming back to your question, in practice, when you pose that question, which is right the way through the holiday period, having discussed it as well with our lawyers on the basis of what we can reveal or not reveal, and it was something which was carried out at the request of the Charity Commission, which obviously we're working on, etc. And I had to, on that basis, consult every single one of our governors as whether they are comfortable that we would pass it on to you, which we got on to you as soon as I could. And in fact, I actually rang through last week to see whether we could, to inform Libby that this is what I was going to get over.
But Lord Stirling, you've only given us part of it. Like you, when you appeared before, you only gave us part of the remuneration package.
There were two factors, there were two aspects in it which have been deducted because they are commercially sensitive, and that is something which we did discuss with those who we work with on that front, and we purely just left those two things up.
Well, we're going to ask the charity commissioners whether they think it is commercially sensitive or not. But Derek, might you bring up
thank you, Chairman.
Questions?
You obviously received this £400 million in September and are expecting a further £100 million every year going forward. What we want to, as two committees, want to understand is and have assurances that Motorability Operations, that the money received from Motorability Operations can be used efficiently and effectively. Now, the NOA, we've heard that they've given the recommendation for the need of a long-term strategy on how you're going to use these high-value donations. Are there plans to put this long-term strategy in place, Lord Stirling?
From the point of view of a long-term strategy, in the format that you might recognise it, we don't have strategies in that form because in practice, everything we've been doing for the last 40-odd years is to provide mobility in all its forms as we have been able to do so. When it came to the windfall, and don't forget it was a windfall, if you take account of the pretty well unusual times we live in, that windfall, frankly, we were rather excited about it. And because sort of aspects one should be aware of, it isn't just new ideas, there are some new ideas, and I will certainly ask Paul in a moment to go through some of the areas which we are actively examining today, and by the way, discussed with the Secretary of State only 2 days ago on that front. But one of the areas which is particularly important was in the very early days, what we were never able to do was to be able to put out cars for the severely disabled, which need very high conversions. We never had the money. In practice, just listening to you all this before, it was a suggestion by late David Ennals that when we really found it very difficult at one stage to continue in the 80s that on the basis of if we were to give you relief of VAT, would that be helpful? And we said, absolutely, terrific. We're much appreciative of all the areas where government has helped us to try to get on with this programme. But on the 400, as an example, just to give you a figure, so in practice, over the last 10 years, we've actually adapted and switched some 50,000 vehicles. So we know all about it. It's nothing new. We haven't got to learn about them whatsoever. Highly adapted. Some have anything up to £25,000 to be able to adapt them. Others are much smaller amounts of wheelchair access and side-by-sides and so on and so forth. And in practice, the amount of money which has been spent on that is over 200 million. And so we know that there's a great bigger demand, much bigger demand. You gave a very good example of it yesterday, Paul. So on this aspect, we are very keen that we really want to do many more of these cars for the more severely disabled. And sadly as well, with various illnesses, people do find that a more normal car has to give way to something which has that adaptation. But Paul, would you like to take out the run?
If I may, yes. I've recently arrived and I've been struck by not just the success of the overall scheme, which supplies, as was recognised earlier, an awful lot, 600,000 vehicles, many of which are not particularly heavily adapted. It's also important just to highlight the fact that we, as a charity, make currently £23 million worth of donations every year to 8,500 people who are either our scheme members or are trying to come onto the scheme. And they are in receipt of donations from the charity for much more heavily adapted vehicles. So what we call wheelchair accessible vehicles, these cost £50,000 to £60,000 for the vehicle and the conversions. And also, as part of that subcategory, a thing called a drive from wheelchair vehicle. And many of you will have seen those in your constituencies with your Motability customers, I'm sure. These are very, very heavily adapted vehicles using space drive controls, is the term that we use, and allow people to drive a vehicle using one or two joysticks, for example. These are very expensive things, and very few people can afford them. What we're currently able to do is, as I said, £23 million worth per year. What this donation will allow us to do for an awful long time into the future, and the £400 million is a huge amount of money, we don't deny that, but it will allow us to build up funds to do this over many years in the future, is increase the number of people who are able to receive those grants. For example, I went out with our field team to Kent and met a lady who has been a scheme customer for 10 years, driving a regular MPV type vehicle, with minor adaptations on the steering wheel. The nature of her condition, which is Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, means that she's no longer able to drive a normal vehicle. And so we've now made a grant to her to allow her to be fitted for and to use a wheelchair, a drive wheelchair vehicle.
We don't doubt, genuinely, we don't doubt the good things that you do. There's this arbitrary sum of money come flinging your way. Supposing it was doubled, can you make sense of that? I mean, is it the right sum? And what are your plans for spending the money?
Well, can I make, if I may, there's something which you all ought to be aware of if you don't think, I hope you don't think I'm sort of lecturing in any fashion. You did ask the question about not many of the cars adapted. When this all started in 77, you had just the hand controls. So if you have one leg, automatic for us is a conversion. If you have rheumatoid arthritis, a button start and other aspects of it is a conversion. If you have also, in the old days, old Ford Fiesta never had power steering, you try and start off on a camber. So many of the things with the manufacturers, we work very closely with the manufacturers.
But Lord Stirling, the question was, Derek.
Thank you, Lord Stirling. I mean, we appreciate that. We understand the kind of adaptation needs to be taking place. But what we heard from the NOA just before you, this session, is this panel, is that what you've provided for them so far would spend the £100,000 that the £100 million that you're expecting to get every year, and that 500, the 400 million would sit as a surplus. So what we're trying to understand from you, and maybe it's for you to come back to us at a later date, is actually whether this amount of money is really going to benefit people in the way that it could, and how can you really upscale what you're doing in order to show that money just doesn't sit on your bank balance indefinitely.
Before I just ask Paul to give more body to that, it's not automatic that the 100,000,
No,
the
I
100
understand
million can come to us. If you get a change, the most important factor where money's gone in over 40 Ks is to the build-up of the price list. And if there's any anxiety, which is probably the key one with disabled people, any of our colleagues here today will say, is the concern as to whether the prices could go up in a way which makes life, and they've really got a real concern on their hands. So in practice, that price list is absolutely crucial. And there are times when Mike Betts might turn around and say, well, look, we're going to have to put at least 100 million into that to have the balance.
The question is different. He's saying, is this money going to be spent, or is it going to be sitting in your reserves?
It'll be spent, but over a period. And perhaps, Paul, you'd like to go into more detail.
What we're projecting, based on the decision-making framework that we've had in place since the Charity Commission report of a couple of years ago, is a means to deal with situations such as this. And when it became apparent last September that we'd be receiving a donation of the scale that we have received, that work continued. And we now have a series of options, highly desirable options, which we are looking to take forward to spend the money on over a period of time. By 2024...
Money more for 100 millions?
Well, I'm dealing with the 400 million that's in front of us at the moment, Chairman. So.
Mr. Representative, can I just suggest something that might become really helpful, and you may be able to explain how it works. If someone loses their PIP money, they obviously then can no longer carry on. So you've been able in the past to provide them for 6 months support or £2,000.
That's right.
But actually the lease might go on for another 2.5 years. Can you explain what happens to that, to the liability for that lease after that 6 month period? And actually with this money, could you actually assure people that if they lose their PIP, you would continue to support them until the end of the lease period? Is that a possibility?
The exact details of what happens to a vehicle after somebody is no longer eligible for the allowance is perhaps better addressed, if I might, to Motorability Operations, because they'll be able to give you far more detail on how that works. I'm glad you recognise the £175 million charitable donation which came from Motorability Operations in 2013, because that is an example of how we have spent a significant amount of money for the benefit of people who are no longer eligible for DLA. I think it's perhaps also worth saying...
Nigel's question.
I'm sorry?
Paul, what about Nigel's question? Derek's question, sorry.
Well, basically, could you consider... And my understanding of the lease is it's in the individual's name. If they can no longer... if the PIP was to finish, they still are responsible for that lease until the end of the lease. And you're right, we can ask that later on. But is there some consideration about how you can help people already in your scheme, in the scheme further, so that they can have the security of that car and not the liability?
Of course. I mean, I should say that we already do that quite a lot anyway, and we treat everybody on a case-by-case basis.
Right, okay.
And I'm not sure if you've had that experience as an MP, but many of your colleagues we deal with I deal with on a daily basis about individual cases. So we are extremely, I think,
Could we have the
helpful.
data on that, Paul?
Yes, of course. Very happy to.
That's fine. John?
Yeah, Mr. Atkinson, this woman in Kent that you mentioned, why wasn't she automatically entitled to an appropriately adapted car?
I'm not sure I understand the phrase automatic, Mr. Mann.
Why wasn't she automatically entitled to an adapted car to fit her needs under the scheme?
There is no automatic entitlement under the scheme to an adapted car.
Yeah, why not?
Well, as I said a moment ago, it's because we don't have enough money to be able to grant everybody that needs these complex adaptations. And that is what is hopefully about to change with the receipt of this very large donation.
So you can quantify the numbers of people who've not been able to have an adaptation because you don't have enough money?
I can't quantify that today, but I'd be very happy to do that research and come back to you.
So, are you in a position, I know I said today, are you in a position to quantify, I'm not asking for the figure now, are you in a position to be able to quantify how many people have not been able to have an adapted car because you don't have enough money?
I'm not in that position.
Could you be?
I could be, but I'm not in that position right now.
Are you saying that there are people out there who do not have access to a vehicle because you don't have enough money to fund an adapted car for them?
I think if I might take it up on there.
It's a simple question.
But this is part of your answer.
I just want a simple answer.
There was a scheme which was run by government called the Mobility Fund. Which
I want to know now.
They stopped it 4 years ago and we took up the running on it of putting up some 20 million a year in practice on those particular customers to do it. We've taken all those on, and between Motability Operations, and they will comment on it as well, because we work so closely together, we are very sure that there are a considerable number of people, when I say considerable, tens of thousands of people, who in practice would like to have an adapted car. An example,
Who haven't got one? Who've asked you for one?
We have them specifically. We haven't had. We deal with pretty well everything that comes
Figures from the art report.
Well, I'm very happy to go away.
I just want to be clear what the figures that I'm asking for. Yeah. I want to know how many people want and require an adapted car who haven't got one because you don't have enough money. And if there's a regional breakdown of that, that'd be even better.
Okay.
You're saying there are people out there.
Yeah. Yes,
and it's purely to do with money.
Yes, there are.
Very good. Right. All right. Now you've got, if I take a case in my constituency, where a young woman was refused by you, despite my protests, an adapted car, which required fairly simple adaptations, for a first ever job, living in a rural area and required transport to get into her first ever job. Now, she was refused by you. But I'm looking at the amounts of money that you've had in reserve, and I'm looking at the even bigger amounts of money you've been paying yourselves than you told us before. And I'm asking myself, what's going wrong with this monopoly? So what is going wrong, Lord Stirling, for my constituent?
Well, first of all, you're talking to the charity at the moment, and I can only say this, that I couldn't find a better bunch of human beings in this country.
I'm not asking about that, I'm asking about I'm real people here.
With the greatest respect, I'm purely saying that the empathy in the teams that look into every single case, until one was able to know the case and what the problem was, and if there is a problem, then it's not been well handled, goes without saying. And if it should have been well handled, that is something that Paul will unquestionably look into. But I can't feel there had to be some reason if that took place.
No, but if we could have data on the numbers of people who applied, the number of refused, and what was the size of your reserves at that period of time. All right, Catherine, a quick one, and then over to Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just a follow-up on, the questions I put initially to the Auditor's Office, but also to Derek's questions, because there's clearly a correlation, and you talk, quite understandably, passionately about the donations that you get and the use that you can put them to, but fundamentally, would you not rather receive a smaller donation and for less profit to be made out of the disabled people that are already paying into Motability Operations?
No. I would have said myself, Chairman, I must have the opportunity to make this point. Motability Operations, what is so unique about it is how it's all evolved. Motability Operations is the following. It is a full-blooded commercially run company in the best possible way, and I spent my life in that sort of field of endeavour, to get the best possible results, the best value, and most important, the highest service in the country. But there's one fundamental difference. After the auditors have struck and decided with the board of what is the profit, unlike any other company, not 1p of those monies go to shareholders, other than the interest, what is it, with the banks in some way. Not 1p. Every single p goes in the interest of enhancing the lives of disabled people, and what's more, it cannot move unless it's sanctioned by the charity, which is the guardian of the whole scheme. So in practice, when one's examining this right the way through, the enhancement, if you follow me, of all the different areas over and above just saying, here's a car, you can drive it and get on with it, has been immense over the last 8 years. And it's something to be extremely proud of. So when one's allocating the monies and talking about your president,
good because you wouldn't be accepting all the recommendations for change.
Yeah,
So back to
I
Catherine.
think fundamentally though, does it not concern you at all, as a charity, as someone that's focused on delivering for disabled customers, that there's a little bit of robbing Peter to pay Paul here, and that perhaps there are people who are paying the price for those profits, who really could do with being charged less in the first place, and that perhaps there may well be a mismatch in the people that you're looking to serve and the people who are being overcharged fundamentally for the provision in the first place.
Of course, we have to strike a balance between looking after the vast majority of our customers who are not in receipt of charitable donations and the minority who are, and that's absolutely right. I don't think any charity would be wishing to turn away a large donation if it thought it could use that properly. And it's probably worth pointing out that we're about to embark on an extremely extensive consultation programme with all sorts of stakeholders, including government and including disability bodies across the country, to find out how best to use this extra money. So, and I think as Sir Amos Moores pointed out earlier on, there's quite a grey area between how much risk you take, how much money do you keep in reserve in Motability Operations, and in order to ensure the bottom line of our if you like, raison d'etre, which is sustainability of the scheme going out for the next 10 years. We have to protect the scheme going out over the next 10 years.
Catherine's point is different. What she's saying is that her constituents, our constituents, are awarded by government because of the condition of those individuals a sum of money from taxpayers. What Catherine is saying, might you not be able to provide that more cheaply so that Catherine's constituents and John's and mine's and Nicky's can actually have more money in their pocket? Is it right that you have a cream of profits and decide who should get money which is raised by Parliament but which Parliament hasn't approved?
but if I could add to that.
No, I've asked Paul, Lord Stirling. Okay. Paul?
I don't see it in those terms, Chairman. I think that we if you like, are in slightly different territory now with this £400 million, as members of the two committees have pointed out. What I can say is that we have a framework for analysing what to do with that money for the benefit of everybody, and we have come up with 3 different categories of potential options, which we're going to explore very intensively, and we already have done. Some of that will involve our existing customers. Some of that will involve groups that we've not been able to help so far. And if you'll allow me for a minute or so, I'll just explain what one of those is. There's a group of individuals in society who receive no allowance at all, despite being very heavily disabled, and those are the under 3s. And so we've been piloting for the last 12 months a scheme which provides vehicles at no cost to the families of under 3s, and we are looking to significantly upscale that as part of the use of this format.
That doesn't solve the fundamental issue, because a charity and where it receives its funds from and who has provided those funds, it has an obligation through its governance structures to be accountable for that money and where it comes from. And I think nobody questions the great work that you do, but the worry is where that money is coming from, and it's coming from other disabled people, and who are now potentially funding something that needs to be funded, that support for families with disabled people, with children under the age of 3, but it doesn't change that issue of where that money is coming from and where that accountability is.
I can answer your point.
The question is, isn't it, when you're doing this wide consultation, this is taxpayers' money. So if you've got these reserves, Catherine is saying, we would all like to see for under 3s covered, shouldn't the government approve that? And say that's an extension of the scheme at nil cost to taxpayers.
You must allow me, please, to comment. Thank you. We receive no public support. That is stated in the report. We don't. Period. We have no. Please allow me, because otherwise I can't help you. And don't forget, as far as I'm concerned, for 40-odd years, that's what we've all been about, and we still feel what we're doing, in actual fact, has been transforming people's lives. Not all the money does. If I may say, if somebody is disabled and has got it, and we have disabled governors here, as far as they're concerned, it is their money. They decide whether they want to take advantage of a voluntary scheme, which is all we are. It's available. If you want to take advantage of it, fine. Otherwise, if you want to go to the cinema, you want to buy a television, you want to go and do what you want with the money as such in that form. And it is not only from there. I would have said that the sheer size and the capability of the management structure and what they're capable of doing, that a very large proportion of the monies we actually achieve is from using to the full our buying power, our relationships with the manufacturers and everything else, and, if I may say, the management, which is key to making sure we have that. So it is not all
Lord
from,
Stirling,
yeah.
we're well over time, and we now move on. I think the whole Committee disagrees with you on that point. But, Steve?
Okay, I'd just like to ask a couple of things about your governance arrangements. I wondered if you could tell me why you found it so difficult to comply with the Charity Governance Code.
The Charity Governance Code.
Why has it been so hard to comply? They're very clear. They say they recommend a limit, a 9-year limit tenure for governors. Anyone who goes beyond that is supposed to be subject to a very rigorous evaluation. In your case, most of your governors served 18 years. You still got 4 who served 16 years. Can you give me evidence that there has been a rigorous evaluation of why they are still in post?
We've had, well, it's a perfectly reasonable question.
I know it is.
No, I'm just saying it. I'm going to give you an answer to it. We have already, as you know, made moves. We have some of our new governors here today. We have 5 here at the moment, and we are going for increased diversity, and within the next year there will be more governors and more diversity. We've been discussing that, and that is moving on over to the modern day approach, if you want, on the number of years people do serve.
Okay, but the question was, first of all, why had it been so hard to comply? And the second part of the question was, do you have evidence that the 4 people who have served 16 years have been subject to a rigorous evaluation? Either you have evidence that that happened or you don't. It's fairly simple.
I've been in international business my whole life, and I mean, if I may say, when you have colleagues on board, you have to take account what do they bring to the organisation. And if they bring a great deal to the organisation, then you get to the stage of saying, are you looking at it for 5 years or for 10 years? Or in actual fact, is it invaluable to continue? I could talk of many organisations that do that. But in practice, as the modern approach is, they're not doing it any longer than that. But there may be a time, sir, if you don't mind my saying so, that somebody might have served it, and one might then say, well, thank you, he's so experienced, it's so helpful to us, any reason why he can't go on for another few years?
No, but the code provides for that, but what it says is, in that situation, you should carry out a rigorous evaluation so that you can provide evidence to justify that. You said a moment ago, Lord Stirling, that you were creating a more diverse governance arrangement. Am I right in thinking there are currently no black, no minority ethnic governors and only 1 woman? Is that right?
At this stage, yes.
Yeah, so it's not that diverse at the moment. Of the 44 recommendations in your own commissioned report to improve the governance situation, how many have you implemented so far?
That's 10 so far.
10?
Yes.
Out of 44?
That's correct.
And when do you expect to implement the other 34?
The plan is to implement all of them by the end of this year, and we expect to be well on the way to do that by the summer of this year.
Is it possible to send us a list of the 10 you have implemented and the 34 in the time scale for when they will be implemented?
Absolutely.
That would be helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Just 2 very brief questions, and thank you, about remuneration, because in March 2016, Lord Stirling, you wrote to Neil Johnson expressing concerns about base pay levels and about bonus percentages. Are you disappointed that action to reduce pay in line with your requests has still not yet happened?
No, it has happened. In practice, when the changes came, and don't forget, in the discussions I had with Neil Johnson, and we know each other extremely well, he's played a key part in the build-up of the management scheme of Motorability Operations. But we have frank comments, and I did say that once you've got past the task force approach of change management, which many of us have been involved in as such, you should be looking at now a change, and if the change takes place, it requires a different remuneration approach. That was taken on board, and the most important factor is he then brought Neil Thomas on the board, who is the chairman of the Remuneration Committee, and he had many discussions with us. And the approach they've made and what they're putting into place and the reductions which are coming through is of a nature that our Board of Governors and us feel comfortable with. Having said that, I think that over and above it though, apart from what's been said in the NAO, my board and I are determined that we wish to have greater influence in time to come, and we are going to be re-examining the contract after a given number of years, and we will be discussing with both the charity commissioners on the whole. Don't forget, they say we cannot be shadow directors. That's the charitable law, as you would know better than I do. But we are addressing this, and together with our legal advisors. But if possible, I think this can be done in a form which doesn't require pieces of legal paper about. In practice, we are comfortable that the present chairman of the Neil Thomas, who, by the way, as you probably all know, is the experts in the City of London in raising long-term money for companies internationally. That's why we've known each other for many years. But in practice, he is doing what the board feels comfortable with, but we want to be more involved in those decisions.
So let me just confirm this. Everything up to 2016-17, the remuneration, the total package paid to the Chief Executive was going up. You're saying for the years 2017-18 and 2018-19, the whole package has come down from the highest level achieved in 16-17, which is 1.7 million.
Yeah, I don't have the actual figures in my mind, but in 2015, the chairman announced in his report that the changes were starting to take place in practice. It's quite clear. It's in his statement.
We will ask Motorability Operations.
I think it's appropriate if I may really get into that depth. I think
we'll ask the company. The second question is, you as a charity have the right to send a governor to attend the company's remuneration committee, but the National Audit Office in their report said that the charity has not exercised that right since 2013. Why not?
May I make the point, it has never been a right. It was right from day one when I actually started this.
So the National Audit Office has got this wrong?
Please, I can't say whether they've got it wrong or right or whether they misunderstand. From the very beginning, we've had a marvellous working relationship with the Ministry of Health, as it was in those days, and then ongoing with DWP, and even our first director was seconded actually from the Ministry of Health. So we've always worked together, they've always sat in, and indeed it was only 2 or 3 before the Secretary of State has stood down. We've actually said several times to them, don't forget you have a total right, and with absolute pleasure, because we want you to understand everything that we're doing to attend, and they have started to re-attend.
The difficulty, Lord Stirling, everything I'm hearing so far is there has been a very long-term, cosy relationship between the charity and the company. And I think that over the years you have done amazing work, but you have forgotten that this is an arm's-length relationship. Perhaps bringing Mr. Atkinson into this structure is the first step in that. But it says to me here, when I ask you about Motability has the right to send a governor to attend the company's remuneration committee, what I get back is, first of all, the National Audit Office has got that wrong. I'm quoting.
Oh, I do apologise.
And then I'm hearing a reasons as to why that's not necessary. If you had concerns about remuneration in 2016,
I completely misunderstood.
Why would the charity not send a representative to attend remuneration committee meetings to express that concern in person?
Humble apologies. I completely misunderstood the question. I thought it was the right of government to attend our our board meeting.
No.
It's my fault. I've completely misunderstood. We had the right of having an observer right the way through in past years.
So why haven't you used it?
And then, no, it's only since 2013, I think it is, since then. And when we got to know the new remuneration chairman and what he intended to do, keeping us fully in the picture, having many meetings, not just for those particular meetings, that stopped having an observer there. But as an observer, you're not having any say in what it was about, and we know exactly what he's doing because he's good enough to keep us absolutely fully in the picture. But having said that, on behalf of our board, we intend, when we update the contract, that there will be a tighter basis of how remuneration is handled.
Because time is very short, and I other questions, but I just that can't be right, Lord Stirling, because if you have had the right to attend, the charities have the right to send an observer since 2013. You sent letters in both 2012 but also 2016 with concerns about remuneration, but you still, the charity, failed to send an observer to follow up on your concerns.
Well, they are the 3 official meetings have a year. Look, with hindsight, maybe one should have made certain that somebody did attend it. I can't honestly say that.
All right, thank you.
All right, very good. Nigel?
So when you're updating the contracts, Lord Stirling, with Motorability Operations, will you be wanting to have a bit more influence over the amount of reserves they're holding rather than transferring to you?
Well, I think you may be aware that we did announce that in actual fact, and it's already happening by the way, that the charity itself has instituted a full-blooded commission of review of all reserves, which the NEO is totally in the picture of course, with the full support of the board of Motorability Operations. It's actually being commissioned as we speak at the moment. And when that comes out, at the end of the day, it isn't a question of who's right and who's wrong. We hope that will demonstrate clearly what degree of risk, and don't forget this is all about risk, which we can take to carry on having sustainability. The whole operation over many, many years is dependent on 3 guiding principles: excellence of service, value for money, and sustainability. And it's sustainability with these uncertain times, which is the key factor. And this review, full-blooded review, which will be at the end of it, will indicate as to whether or not more monies could be released. Don't forget the reserves are not reserves in the usual sense of the word, or not. And all I'm saying is, when we get that, then we'll be able to have a full answer.
But you don't at this stage have a view that why those reserves look a lot higher than we'd have thought they could be, and perhaps they shouldn't be.
I have to say, the governors I have on our board are highly experienced. Pretty well everybody's been involved in the international business world as such. And there are very considerable risks out there, which as an organisation and raising money in the bond markets, etc., is you've got to take into account the possibilities of what could happen or not. But I do suggest that you'll be speaking in a moment with our colleagues over there, and we work very closely together. I don't accept the word cosy. It is that relationship of how we actually work together which is part of its success.
You suggest you're not cosy enough. You never go to the meetings when you could go. Nigel?
Just as a last one, Lord, it sounds a bit like you're doing this review because you've been forced to, but you don't actually believe there's a problem, and you're hoping this review will tell you everything's been fine all along. I mean, is that a fair conclusion?
No, because in actual fact we were initiated to do it as the board before we even knew about NEOs or otherwise. We had these discussions in March earlier this year of doing it, but with the amount of work coming up and then the NEO, the inquiries had to be done, there's a huge amount of work to be done on the finance divisions of both organisations, and it was decided that we will do it once we got to the stage of that workload being over. There's a lot to go into it. It's being commissioned with one of the great firms, etc., to come through, and with a bit of luck, I don't know how long, it could take 3 months, these things, and we'll see what transpires.
Very good. Lord Stirling, thank you, and Paul, thank you very much. Again, can we emphasise our thanks to the scheme?
Yeah.
and what it's actually done for so many of our constituents over the years. Any anxiousness on our part is that we want stage 2 of this scheme so that more of our constituents can benefit by what you've done. And the country owes you a debt, Lord Stirling, even though we're quite tough with our questioning. Thank you very much.
First of all, we found the NAO totally professional in their approach. You always learn something from these. It's too easy to think you don't learn. And when you think you're the best, the worst thing that can happen is you start going down. We've learned, we will learn more when we go through this. The sort of questions many of you are asking. After all, there's nearly 22,000 constituents sitting around of our membership sitting here, etc. You probably know their hopes and their areas. There's so much change in technology coming through. We've got to take account of it, etc. For the coming years, electric cars, whatever might happen on that front. One takes in totally good humour, if I may say, the difficult questions, awkward questions. We're all human. But if I may say so, the same way as you talk about the number of years I've been involved with it and how many should be on it, do I congratulate you on having 40 years
together
coming up
we're
as
going
an
to
MP.
actually make the job even better. But nobody wants to take credit away from that initiative that you did all those years ago with Alf Morris. It's been
very charming of you.
Thank you
very much. But if I may say, there's thousands of unsung heroes out there who played the part. It's a team operation, and that's what it's about. Thank you for those kind words.
John Mann's constituent wants a car. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we'll have to use surnames, won't we, this time? Because we've got...
J would work if that's...
I know. Neil Thomas, might you begin to identify yourself for the sake of the record?
I will, Chairman. Good morning, everybody. I'm Neil Thomas. I'm the Senior Independent Director and Chair of the Remuneration Committee at Motorability Operations.
Chairman Neil Johnson. I chair Motorability Operations Group.
Good morning, Chairman. Mike Betts. I'm the CEO of Motorability Operations.
Thank you very much. Nikki.
I want to start with, and I know you've been sitting in the public gallery, so you'll have heard the NAO's evidence and read the report about the unplanned profit accrued over the last 10 years. It talks about, I asked the EMIS about undervaluing customers' cars. Is this a deliberate policy? How has this unplanned profit arisen? Could this scheme be done much more cheaply, as we've explored in other questions?
I'm going to very quickly comment, and then I'm going to ask Mike to get into some more detail. First of all, I endorse what Lord Stirling said. We found the whole NAO report process very professionally handled, and I think the rapport between the two organisations was very good. I'm also delighted that Sir Amyas again this morning reiterated his point that these issues that we're discussing, and we do take them very seriously and on board, are in almost every sense the problems that come with sustained success of the scheme. And that includes the sort of pricing policy and the way in which we pitch it commercially. And so if I can ask Mike just to deal with some of the detail there.
Thank you, Neil. First of all, absolutely nothing deliberate. We always set out to get it right. What this 390 million represents, so lease pricing involves estimates. That 390 million is the difference between the sum of all the estimates of the value of the cars that we put out and the sum of what the proceeds were that we actually received. It is a big number. I think it's a bigger number. I mean, what the NAO talked about, they've talked about generating £826 million unplanned profit. The distinction between those two numbers is that the 390 was in lease pricing. The move in other numbers was accounting movements, which did not affect lease pricing. So the 390 million, to put that into perspective, that is over 10 years, and it's over 2 million cars, and that represents 3%. Now, once we start a lease, we watch it to see how it's performing. If it is performing well, then we can take action. And actually, what we've done over that period is we've returned 470 million to the same customers, as good condition bonuses and end of contract payments. In fact, if you look at the report on page 37, there is a list of the investments that we've done over that time frame, and it values the whole lot, and some of the extra would be free adaptations, things like that, at 757 million that we put in. Also, the NAO were kind enough to point out the thing is 44% cheaper. If I bring it up to date, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it, we've had a very good year this year, the market is buoyant. In September this year, we made a decision to increase that good condition bonus from £250 to £500. So everyone who is today a customer, when they return that car, potentially will get £500. They didn't expect that. That initiative has actually cost us £305 million. It's not, it was just happening as the report came out. And so it is true that we start off with this estimate. It's going to be wrong one way or the other, but it is also true that we can make up for it. So we absolutely would not say that customers have been overcharged, and I think Sir Amias actually made it quite clear that there were other variables going on, and it's quite a complex field.
Okay, so rather than giving customers back more money for good conditions bonus, I mean, I think one of the other changes would be if you were to change the depreciation policy as a result of the NAO's work. Is that something you're going to be considering?
Well, what we are going to do is review whether we can be more accurate. As I said, we're accurate to within 3%. I mean, what we attempt to do is to get the future value right. I mean, I suspect the question, and it came from over there earlier, was can we put that just purely into pricing? There is a point where that becomes sort of, you're beyond the marginal return there. And so to return directly to customers does ensure that they actually do receive all that money. If we put stuff into pricing, it doesn't necessarily always end up in a cheaper car. For instance, this year, our depreciation is actually reduced by £600. Prices have been largely flat, and that's because that reduction from us has largely offset increase in cost for manufacturers. So it hasn't actually made its way through to pricing. So it's a good point. I mean, yes, you can do that, but it's not a sort of a linear, efficient investment.
I mean, it's just really sort of taking money from customers, and then hopefully if they return the cars, obviously, they get the money back. There is another way. Just finally, what about lease charges? Will you be looking at those as a result of the NAO's work?
So we absolutely try and be as efficient as we can be. I'm sure we'll talk about remuneration. I mean, overhead cost is 4% of the lease. The two big ones are depreciation insurance. We've done lots of work on that. The changes to insurance that we implemented have actually saved customers £40 million. But absolutely, yes, we do that every year, and we'd be happy to do it again. We had an Ernst & Young report which looked at our efficiencies, and that concluded that the scheme is actually 28% more efficient over the time period they looked at, and that was a 10-year period ending 2014.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Charlie? Yes. Just turning on the remuneration side, you heard the Mr. Johnson, the evidence of the Comptroller and Auditor General earlier in relation to the remuneration of the board. And let me first start by asking about the letter, or the correspondence that you received from the charity expressing concern about levels of pay. What did you do about that?
I've had some very detailed discussions with Lord Stirling. You'll probably have seen the reply letter as well, which I think was also in the NAO report. And as Lord Stirling said in the earlier evidence session, as a result of those discussions, there was agreement that, in fact, the policy was in line with what they had previously been asking for. I think Lord Stirling mentioned as well that in 2014, which was 2 years before the exchange of those letters, I'd initiated and announced a review of executive pay, and Neil Thomas, who I'm sure will talk about this later, came in to take the chair of the Remuneration Committee and to review the way that we should go forward, and those reviews have all been adopted. And the result of that, as I think we discussed last time, has been a drop in senior executive pay of around 20%. That has been masked.
That's not the case. The chief executive's pay has continued to rise, hasn't it?
I was about to say that has been masked by the fact that there was a rollout of 3 years on the previous system. So that is now the last year of that previous scheme is has just passed.
And I wonder...
hang on, let me finish. Carry on, Mr Johnson, because you are in charge of governance on the board, aren't you, as chairman? So let's just talk about your governance, which the Comptroller and Auditor General, I have to say, seem to cast some doubt on, particularly that the LTIP's performance targets throughout the whole period have always been met. He questioned whether they're challenging enough and whether it's all just, a case of a bad scheme and poor governance.
I don't think that the Auditor General commented on corporate governance other than in a complementary fashion at Motorability Operations. And I've had that discussion with him, so I'm very confident in that statement.
It wasn't challenging enough, was it? Did you make it challenging enough, and did you actually make it so it's a proper challenging incentive scheme?
They are challenging, and I would add, they've worked. The thing I think that everybody needs to keep in mind here, this is a very complex, large business, a balance sheet of over £8.5 billion. We are buying and selling towards 1,000 cars every day. It's extremely complex. And when I was asked by the shareholder banks to come in and deal with some of the very major concerns there were with the running of the scheme, both in terms of customer satisfaction and financial stability, what was absolutely clear to me was that we needed to establish a commercial model which worked. And part of that commercial model was bringing in very professional managers who could actually get a grip of the issues and now deliver what's been done over time. And let's not forget that the problems here of success are that we are number one for customer service in the UK, with a very demanding group of customers. Our disabled customers deserve the very best that they can get, and that's what is delivered by the scheme. We've also, over that time, been able to improve the financial performance of the scheme to a point where there are surpluses which can be donated to the charity, which is the only route under the agreement that Motorability Operations has for surpluses. And well, if we've made the surplus, then we...
But next year you could reduce the price.
That's something that I'm sure in the future we will look at, as I think you know.
No, but this is all some years ago. What we're talking about is now in more recent times when Mr. Betts has done a great job. And no one is questioning it whether Mr. Betts has done a great job. The key question is on your chairmanship and your governance of this organisation. So let's talk about that. Do you accept it was disingenuous not to mention the additional £1.7 million lump sum bonus when the committee was asking you questions about Mr. Betts' pay? Do you accept that as a matter of company law and regulations, the large and medium-sized companies regulations, groups and companies and groups accounts and reports regulations 2008 required disclosure and you did not procure that?
I believe that's wrong.
You believe that's wrong?
I believe your statement is wrong because it doesn't apply to our company.
Why doesn't it apply to your company?
Can I ask?
I'm asking you.
I'm sorry,
as the chairman.
I'm going to. Okay.
Why doesn't it apply to your company?
I'll explain, and then Mr. Thomas can confirm. One of the things that I asked him to do when he came in to take the chair of the Remuneration Committee was to confirm that everything that had been done so far was correct. And independently, Mr. Thomas went to do that and took external advice. The external advice was it was absolutely correct from our auditors.
Why?
Well, because they'd been asked the question.
Would it be helpful if I provided some context? Because to some extent I'm the fresh pair of eyes here.
Well, can I just clarify? Do these regulations apply to this company, yes or no?
Mr. Elphick, in specific to those, what I have to say is we checked with our auditors, PwC. I came in 2015 and asked them a very direct question, and they confirmed orally to me that the disclosures in the accounts are consistent with the accounting principles for unquoted companies. Now, what I'm
orally, not in writing.
Would you get that in writing for us, Neil? Because we've had trouble with.
I would understand
I'm quite concerned with orally. I mean, you're an accountant yourself, of very considerable standing. How could you take such an important thing as a matter of oral? Why is it not in writing? Why do you not require that?
I am going to make my colleagues laugh by just putting on the record I am not an accountant, so that is factually correct. So I am not the expert in this field, and therefore I rely on our auditors to do so. And to the extent that they did confirm that accounting treatment, because effectively each year they sign off the accounts and they put their name to it. So I think the right response to your question, if we can be helpful, is to say in specific to those provisions, we would have to ask that of the technical experts. At that point, I will say I'm not an accountant, I'm not a technical expert,
okay.
but it was confirmed as accurate.
Okay, so auditors advise, corporate governance is clear, auditors advise, directors decide, and you're not just some kind of hapless person that walked off the street that doesn't know any accounts, because let's be clear, you were the head of corporate finance and global head of capital advisory at KPMG UK. So I think you probably know your company law, don't you?
I know my company law. I'm not a technical accountant. So what I would say, though, is what I'm really pleased, because I'm sure we will come on to it, is in 2015 I chaired a review of remuneration, and one of the recommendations was actually that we increase the level of information in relation to remuneration in the accounts. And I must say personally I'm really pleased that actually if you look at the accounts and the disclosure and the amount of information, we now exceed that required by accounting standards. So what I would say is on balance, my own personal feeling is it would have been better if we had pushed sooner for that change. But that is reflected in the latest set of accounts and is a direct consequence of the review that I chaired in 2015.
Well, this should have all happened much before now, and the governance questions are being directly asked of you, Mr Johnson. And also, in October 17, it was agreed to give Mr Betts free retention payments of £120,000 each for each of the 3 years. Why did he need these retention payments as well as the long-term incentive plan and the long-term incentive scheme?
Shall I do the
Yes,
detail?
I think so.
So the 2015 review that I'd led, put this in context, was very much on the basis, and we will return to this because I think this is the fundamental issue at the heart of all of this. The agreed business model is for Motability Operations to be run on commercial lines and with levels of pay commensurate with the private sector. That said, when I became chair of the Remuneration Committee, with the support of both chairs, I undertook a review. And using external advisors and consulting with the charity, the impact of that review was to recommend some major changes, including a significant reduction in executive director pay. So, as is noted in the National Audit Office report, pages 10 and 43, the reduction in Mike's remuneration goes from 1.7 million to 1.4 million. Now, again, standing back, it is really important if you turn around to someone and say their pay is reducing by 20%, that you don't lose them and the management team. And what was quite clear as we worked through the methodology in 2016 and its impact, that actually having said to Mike, your reduction will be 20%, it was quite clear the reduction was going to be more than that. And so as not to break faith, the Remuneration Committee determined to put in place not an increase in salary or bonus, but actually 3 payments which Mike would lose if he resigned, i.e. proper retention. But I'm sorry for the lengthy explanation, but there is a very good reason for that. Pay does drop from 1.7 to 1.4 million for Mike Betts, as noted in the National Audit Office report.
That's what the Prime Minister gets.
Chairman, I acknowledge that. I think also, and we will return to this because I think there is an important point here, the business model for Motability Operations, as currently agreed, is to be run on commercial lines. And I believe actually the Auditor General, I wrote it down because I've had these discussions with him. He said on the record earlier, remuneration is just a feature of the situation. That's not to underplay it, but what I would say as head of remuneration is we do have to get this right. And we have to get it right for what all stakeholders want for the future of the scheme. So if you raise this up to the level that I believe this committee is also looking at it, what is this scheme? What fantastic success has it delivered? What do you want in the future? How do you want it to be run? And remuneration has to align with that. At the moment, it's aligned with the current business model.
That's not what Amy has said.
Can I say, Chair?
I said
maybe
to
I
him it was the outward visible sign, this sum of money being paid, of inward changes that need to be made to get value for money for taxpayers. That's what I put him as a question, and it's that he agreed to, not the small snippet you've quoted back at us.
I apologise if I was quoting out of context. Maybe I heard him differently. But the principle still, I think, I would be keen to stress applies, that I would acknowledge that we need to get this right.
Well, no, what Sir Amir said was there needs to be change and that the position was not acceptable. That's what I heard. And I have to say, a lot of the evidence I've heard from both of you is, I feel evasive, and I feel that there's a lack of openness, a lack of transparency, a lot of defensiveness. And can I just finish with this question? There was the decision was clearly taken not to disclose the 1.7 million plus annual interest of 4% a year for the long-term incentive plan. Was that a deliberate omission? Yes or no?
No. As I'm sure you're aware, because you'll have seen the exchange of correspondence, when the chairman, Mr. Field, wrote to me on the 5th of December, I replied by return on the 6th of December with the full rationale for what had happened. I think there are 2 points further that I'd like to make, and they were both confirmed by the National Audit Office in their evidence earlier. The first is that I think Sir Amir Smalls made it very clear that your suggestion that we have been in breach of the Companies Act is not the case. I don't know what you're reading from. You're certainly not reading from their report. The second
No, what they said is, it seemed to me a case of a difference of letter and spirit was the impression I got, and that if a case of sticking to the letter, you could evade that requirement.
And I'm sorry, what I thought you were saying was that we were not sticking to the letter.
Well, I think the spirit matters too. Let's be honest. You're all city figures. The spirit matters as much as the letter in companies matters in large enterprises like this. And I think being evasive and playing, and that kind of, behaviour is not right.
I don't think anybody's behaving badly in any of this, Mr. Elphick. I think what we're trying to do is to deliver the scheme with a very good management team. Let's go back to the start of that particular bonus scheme, which was put in place in 2010, 2 years after the financial meltdown, just as the company was coming into stability. The board was faced with a period of very severe turbulence in the markets, particularly in the motor industry and in the leasing markets and financial markets, which I'm sure you will recall. There was a very clear risk that we might lose not just our chief executive, but the entire top team to another leasing company which was maybe getting into difficulties and had seen the turnaround which had happened at Motorability Operations. And we were very persuaded that the right thing to do was to try to confirm and commit our management team through the turbulent times that were coming. So that's the genesis of it. And if I look back at it now, I ask myself the question, was it the right thing to do? It was the right thing to do because it's worked. We've kept our senior team together, and they have most importantly delivered fantastic customer satisfaction to 625,000 disabled constituents of yours and your colleagues over that period of time. To the extent that whether you think Amazon or John Lewis do a different job from the job that we do, nevertheless, Motorability Operations is the #1 customer satisfaction company in the United Kingdom and has consistently been so for the last number of years.
We're not disputing any of that. The question that Charlie's been putting is, when this committee inquired into BHS and a merchant bank forgot to tell us information and then wrote rather sadly afterwards to admit what had happened, that merchant bank in effect sacked their senior person on the board.
But Chairman, I'm sure you will accept, and I've looked very carefully at the transcript of our last meeting, there was no suggestion in that meeting that anything was being concealed. You received all of the information that you asked for.
But you then gave us information afterwards.
But that's what you asked for. You asked for the minutes
But
of...
because you hadn't actually told us.
Well, in this forum, I have to say, it's very difficult to answer a question you've not been asked.
Well, you were not frank with this committee. Do you disagree with his judgment you were not frank?
Oh, I think it's a judgment. I don't agree with it, because I would always try to be frank and open, and I believe my colleagues too. And this had been, as I put in the letter to the chairman, this had been included in every annual report and account since 2011. And maybe it's naive of us to believe that they're read in detail. Maybe it's naive of us to believe that the minutes that we forwarded to you were actually read in detail. But everything was in there. Nothing was concealed. We're very proud of what's been achieved. And as a result of those conversations with the National Audit Office, we took the pretty much instant decision to try and clear up any confusion by changing our reporting of remuneration in our annual report and accounts to very significantly exceed the levels which are actually required.
No, can I just ask a quick last supplementary? You basically said we had to retain our top team, we did what was necessary. If you went back 5 years, is there anything you would change? Or do you just think, no, I wouldn't change anything I did?
Well, that's a question that would take longer than we have to answer. There are always things to learn. I think that we've also lived through a very dynamic period in terms of executive pay. If I was asked to make the same decision today as opposed to 10 years ago, I think it would be a much more complex decision to take. But that's because the atmosphere has changed.
Neil, I think we'll look very carefully at those accounts, whether it was as full as you suggest. So we'll do a bit more homework. You'll do a bit more homework. Heidi.
Thank you. I'll start just a very quick question, really, but an extract from the NAO's report. Motorability Operations has invested $1.37 billion since 2008 in a range of initiatives that have increased costs into its business and are designed to improve its customer offer. However, it is unable to demonstrate how effective this investment is in driving continued achievement of the scheme's strategic objectives. You spent a lot of money, customers love you, they don't really love you any more than they always loved you, and you're still only accessing 36% of the possible market. What are you doing with that money? In my private business background, I'd nag to my staff to turn the heaters off if they didn't need them on, or to forget to leave the water heater on. You're always looking to save costs. Why are you not doing that in your organisation?
Well, we do, but
give me some examples.
Well, first of all, we would nag people to turn the heaters off as well, so we try and be as efficient as we can.
Although, not for cold stuff.
I think we are this single-purpose entity, and we are there to provide as good a value as we can for our customers, and so that is where we invest that money. As I think I made the point earlier, some money goes into pricing to try and bring the prices down, and this year a significant amount has gone into that to offset some of the manufacturer cost increases. But one of the most efficient ways of investing into customers is to...
Talk about saving money.
So, in terms of the scheme saving money, well, for instance then...
What do you do as a normal business would do to drive costs down and make sure you're always
so
competitive?
Probably the best example is setting up that insurance company. What that did is replace capital from the commercial insurance provider with our own retained reserve. What that meant is we stopped paying interest on that capital, and we were able to pass a £40 million saving through to our customers. The price per lease of our operation has dropped year on year on year as we drive an annual budget process, I'm sure the same as you do. I think the difference then is, because we are not-for-profit, and let's not make a mistake, that doesn't mean we don't try and make any. That means that when we do make some, it stays in this closed system. We have to talk to the charity about the priorities of where to put that. Now, a lot of that investment that you've just highlighted, 10 years ago, if you wanted a hand control on the scheme, you'd have to pay for it. Now it's free. That's part of that investment. The wheelchair accessible vehicles that we put on the scheme, every year, every vehicle now we lose on average about £3,800. Again, 10 years ago, there was no subsidy in there. I mentioned the good condition bonus. That's another investment. So this is about really saying, where should the next level of investment go? It's interesting, Mr. Mann's constituent, I mean, there is the money there to get that person mobile. There probably isn't enough money to get absolutely everybody mobile who wants complex adaptations. But that's the sort of route that we're going. And yes, I would say, yeah, if there is a competition for being efficient, I'd love to enter it. I mean, we really do drive this down and down and down. And I could give you all sorts of stats about how the car that people can get for their money has increased in value as we've become more efficient. And that's partly why the reserves have had to go up, because the value of the cars has gone up so significantly.
I suppose one really crude example, because there's always a balance in a business, isn't there? Investing to make your products better so your customers want them and they're happy with them and they keep coming back to you, although, again, I would argue still why you're only accessing 36% of the market. But there's always that balance, isn't there, with investment, with your expenditure and your overheads. You know, I'm a big fan, as I'm sure everybody is around this table, of employers paying their staff very well. National minimum wage, living wage, and we talk a lot about. But if I take one example, you have a call centre in Bristol. You advertised your call centre operative jobs there at $25,000 a year, compared with other call centres in the area, 19.5. Customer service, you know, John Lewis, I think, pride themselves on paying more for better customer service. But they're the sort of costs that we're looking at, whether you're really looking at efficiencies, as opposed to just paying lip service.
Yeah. Can I just take the spirit of that, pick a word, and then Mike can talk about some of the detail. And I think you've picked on a really good example, if I may say so. In our call centres, we have, over time, moved them to a place where we empower our colleagues to take decisions on the phone. We're therefore trying to hire a rather better style of individual than might be more common in more commercial call centres. And the results of that are coming through in customer satisfaction, because, you know, we are investing in that proposition of a one-stop shop that one of our customers, one of our disabled customers who's in trouble or has some concern, can get on the phone and it all gets solved. And that is part and parcel of this upskilling of the business, which comes at a price, and I fully accept that.
Quality staff.
And just to finish, Mike, if I may, an interesting point is that all of our shareholder banks, who obviously have seats on the board, so they know what's going on in the business, are absolutely fascinated by and involved in trying to learn from that process, from that improvement in customer service by upskilling.
As well, given the mega fines they are suffering for the way they've treated most of their customers. But Rosie wants to actually come in. Can Rosie come in before we continue?
About that. I mean, those salaries, great if you're getting brilliant people. What are you actually doing to enable or encourage your users and disabled people to apply for those jobs and to make their workplaces accessible?
So can I say we do have brilliant people? I mean, the call centre is brilliant. The people in Bristol are absolutely fantastic. And if you phone our call centre, you will get straight through. That means that whoever answers your call has to be able to answer anything that you might get thrown at you. And we have a 91% first-time resolution rate. And actually that makes the call centre cheaper to run, believe it or not, than these call centres that offer less. It is an absolutely superb operation. And the types of call that are coming through are people that have just been informed that they've got to go for a PIP assessment, or just been informed that they've failed in their PIP assessment. We get people threatening self-harm. I mean, the amount of empathy that we've got.
So how many of them are self-identify as being disabled?
Well, so that's a voluntary thing. That our numbers are disappointing when you look at them. It would be sub 10%. What we do have is lots of relationships with local disability organisations, and we make sure that there are always disabled people in the net when we recruit. We are very, very proactive in that regard, and we have a disabled scholarship where we send disabled people through university. We have summer placements for disabled people, and wherever we can, we will employ disabled people, and we are really pushing that. Everybody, I think, needs to do more. We all need to do more. And we would be happy. Could I also extend an invitation to people to come and visit us in Bristol?
You made a really interesting point for those of you who've got call centres in our constituencies. You were saying you pay very much above, and yet you actually run it cost-wise more efficiently.
I believe we do.
do you think you could give us more information? Because I think I'd love it to present to our call centre owner that might be paying higher wages, he'll get a better deal.
Well, I think that is one of the principles that goes throughout our organisation.
No, seriously, it's a really, really interesting point.
You also mentioned the living wage there. I mean, we paid the living wage, and we insist on it for all of our contractors on site and everything else.
No, yes, this is admirable stuff. Back to
so just to complete then, perhaps, it is a very different conversation you're having with customers who are perhaps panicking than where's my shopping. I appreciate that. But it's, our heads have been turned a little bit, as you know, by the headline figures of some of the salaries and remuneration in the organisation. And perhaps a different way to tackle it is, could you give us a breakdown of that 1.37 billion investment in the last 10 years and tell us where it's been invested?
So if you look at page...
I don't know for time, Chair, would you prefer if we had this to us in writing?
If you look at page 37, I think the NA will break it down for you, but basically there's about 470 million going back to customers as good condition bonuses and return to dealer payments. There's about 35 million going into subsidising wheelchair accessible vehicles. Adaptations are now free of charge on the scheme. There are also incentives in place for suppliers of ours to ensure that they also can give the right level of service for our customers when they visit their premises. So dealers would be an obvious one, insurance company, tyre fitters. And so when we strike their contracts, it's not just an exchange of monies. There are incentives in there for them to get to a higher level of service, which is then independently measured. So it's all been used to improve the proposition. Another really important one is like-for-like replacements when a car goes off the road is really difficult for us. And a lot of that money is in either taxes, if we can't get an adapted car to someone, or in adapted hires, which are quite expensive.
Yeah,
so there's a multi-million...
As we know, not many cars are actually adapted, but...
it depends where you define adapted. If an adaptation that would sort of actually require a sort of soldering iron, yes, you're talking about 5%, but then there are things that bolt on and come off and all the rest of it. But remember, not all of our customers can drive, and when you join the scheme, you can nominate 2 drivers. So you're right, there's a lot of standard cars.
Carers and people.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, can we, Chris? And then John?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The NOA report had talked about Motorability Operations holding enough reserves against operational and cyber risk. And we were looking at the reserves picture, 2008, around about £500 million, now 2018, 2.62 billion. So, Mr Johnson, can you justify the business reason for holding such large reserves?
Yeah, well, I'll start, and then again I'll hand to Mike to paint in some of the detail. The level of reserves that we required in the business were discussed very in great detail with the charity and the rationale for them as well, to make the business sustainable and secure for the future. I think that one of the things which has been discussed previously, and certainly was the subject of a lot of conversation with the National Audit Office, was, and I think the Auditor General used the term conservative and maybe over-conservative. And I think the point that I would very strongly like to make, really on behalf of our disabled customers, is that this is not a leasing company like any other leasing company. If another leasing company has insufficient reserves and goes to the wall, then its customers can go somewhere else. Our customers can't. And that's why we need to have sufficient reserves in place. We have, however, said very clearly that we're happy to, and have already commenced a review to make certain that everybody is comfortable with the level of reserves that are there. Yeah. So, Mike.
Very important to say, these reserves save our customers, your constituents and their families, £400 a lease. Sir Amias was kind enough to point out, this is not cash. I think this has been one of the real problems for us to explain to people this is not cash. When we buy a car, we put a third in and we have to borrow 2/3. If you scale that up, that means that we're funding 2.5 billion and we're borrowing 4.1 billion, and the total is 6.6 billion of cars. The rest of the balance sheet is other assets. And so it's a £400 per lease saving. It's not idle money, it's doing good for our customers. So QED, if you bring that down, then you're going to put the lease prices up, and the NAO report recognises that. I can quote you the page numbers. I absolutely accept what was said by the NAO. You can bring reserves down. That is a conscious choice to charge our customers more, to do something else with that money. And I also would say there is a point, if you go beyond, that you will actually not only have to replace that borrowing, but you'll make the cost of borrowing go up. And there's another point beyond which you won't be able to borrow. Sorry, we didn't answer your specific question. There's 3 reasons why it's gone up that much. One is the value of cars, one is the emergence of cyber risk, and one is that we started our own insurance company.
Yeah, but do you understand, Mr. Betts, the criticism? And our view, just hearing that Mr. Mann's constituents told that there's no funding to help them. I'm always battling the DWP to try and keep someone in a car, and we have this company that's went from £500 million and in 10 years 2.6 billion.
Yes.
So do you understand the criticism?
Well, I absolutely do understand the concern. What I would say is that the numbers are the same answer, are a different answer to the same question. The reason they're different is we started doing our own insurance, the cars got more valuable. I absolutely would take the point. There is enough money there to fund Mr. Mann's constituent. The question is about strategic priority. Do you want to do that, or do you want to make all hand controls free, or do you want to subsidise other things? And so that is a question of strategic priorities.
Money to a charity, couldn't we?
Well, we sit and decide with the charity each year where the money will be invested. So, for instance, this year we've put 305 million into good condition bonus. We've put over another 10 million into subsidising adaptations and wheelchair accessible vehicles, and we've donated the 400 million to the charity. And there are questions about what is the priority as to what to do with that money. I would absolutely echo what's been said. This fundamentally is the question. The success of this business means that big amounts of money can be generated. What is the priority for the use of those monies?
Right, back to Chris.
Okay, so just to clarify then, if your cost of capital is lower, do you pass on the lower costs onto the customer?
Penny for penny.
Yeah. Penny for penny. Okay, so the NOA report had showed that relative to your size, you hold twice the proportion of capital as other car leasing companies do. So if it's cheaper to finance yourself against reserves rather than debt, why don't other companies do the same as you?
Well, I think Neil explained that in terms of we would expect to have more capital than other leasing companies. I used to run one of those leasing companies on that chart, and I'd also point out we're not an outlier on that chart. We're not even top of that chart. If we fail, there is nowhere for our disabled customers to go. It would be a catastrophic event. Those other leasing companies may or may not fail, and if they do, people can go somewhere else. I mean, the report points out...
If you failed, heaven forbid, the government wouldn't allow you to fail. The House of Commons would demand more money. I mean, this is an unreal prospect, isn't it?
Well, I think if I may, Mike, you said that the last time around, Chair, and I said very honestly that if that was true, nobody told me. We have been handed the task of running this organisation commercially. It is the largest contract hire and leasing business in Europe. It's the same size as Hertz globally, and I think we've made a good job of that. I completely understand the issues which have been raised by the NAO report, and we've accepted all of their findings insofar as we're concerned. And I think that the Controller General is correct to say that one of the obvious outcomes of this is that there needs to be an examination of the strategy going forward and how that works. And maybe that keys into what you're saying.
Thank you. Are you happy with that, Chris?
Yeah, thank you.
John,
last question. Last question. I just confirm that the information I requested of Lord Stirling that you will assist in providing in terms of the numbers of people who require an adapted vehicle who've asked for one and you haven't had the funds. That breakdown would be very useful for us to see. It allows to raise issues with government if you could quantify that for us. You, as a large monopoly, underwritten by government. I mean, one of the concerns I have has been lack of frankness and information. You said, Mr. Johnson, several times that, and you've cited, I think, in your evidence, the Institute of Customer Services, that you're the top performer repeatedly. You're the winner of everything, and you said it 3 or 4 times. Their annual awards are on the 5th of March. I think there's 123 companies are the finalists in the different categories, but you're not there. They publish on their website a league table on customer satisfaction, but you're not on it. So that is the source of your evidence. That's
it
institute.
is, but we will explain the situation.
Can I explain that? So we have a survey done on us by them. Those awards that you refer to are done by an omnibus survey. Unfortunately, we're not large enough in terms of our customers to register on that. But in conversation with the UK CSI, they confirmed that our numbers are the number one. And I believe it's 3 companies have been awarded customer service distinction, of which we are one, and we have the highest score.
You're not large enough in terms of the number of customers?
No, in terms of the number of comments that they received in order to put us into that particular way of doing a league table. But when you look at...
Right, so because, of course, many of these who are there are much smaller organisations than yours, with a much smaller number of customers. So, in fact, you're not getting that many customer comments through then to be able to quantify for any of this.
Perhaps the easiest way is for me to submit something post-event that justifies what was said.
I just make the point anyway.
We
sadly not succeeded in being one of the 124 finalists this year. Better look for next year. On the NEO report, paragraph 23, quote, the full value of a separate incentive scheme for Motorability Operations Chief Executive has not been disclosed previously. And I just wanted to again ask why that happened, because of course you disclosed 258,000 to the outside world, but the likely sum by 2022 is 2.2 million. So why didn't you?
Again, I will make exactly the same point I made to Mr. Elphick when he asked the same question. We did disclose the existence of the scheme. It was mentioned in every annual report from 2011 onwards. I think what the National Audit Office is commenting on, absolutely accurately, is that the number was not disclosed.
The full value has not been disclosed previously. You're dancing on the pin of the head. That's my problem with Mr. Johnson. And what we've had over repeat hearings. You're dancing on the pin of the head. Paragraph 23 of this report into you, the full value has not been disclosed.
And in isolation, that is absolutely correct.
That's a big issue.
But what the Auditor General also said earlier was that the disclosure was absolutely correct in terms of the Companies Act and in terms of the way that we'd handle it. Having understood the level of confusion that this appears to have raised, we have
I'm
now
asking
changed
why.
completely.
So you're a monopoly that's underpinned by the taxpayer via government. And I'm asking a simple question, right? Why were you hiding that amount of money? Why?
It wasn't being hidden.
Well, it was hidden. It wasn't there for me to read or anybody else in this country. So it was hidden. As the National Audit Office points out, it was hidden. You didn't disclose it. And you're coming here and saying it wasn't. We did. No, you didn't. And I'm asking why. And I'm now asking the second question, final question. Why aren't you answering my question? And why do you keep going around this issue? There's a cultural problem in your organisation. And it seems to be quite a deep one. And I'm not sure, from what I've heard today, that it's been solved.
Well, the culture of my organisation, Mr. Mann, is one of customer service. So that is what every member of Motorability Operations team is focused on. To deal with your specific question, you've heard both from me and from Mr. Thomas that having taken expert external advice from our auditors, all the disclosures were in line with best practice. However, having
going to give us that in writing, isn't
yes,
it?
and having
Well,
hopefully, if we can get that, if PwC, having said that, and having heard what the Auditor General said during our discussions with him, we recognised that there could be more openness, and that we should move to that to exceed the levels of which we were demanded of us. And that's precisely what we've done. So there is no intention to cover anything. In fact, if you have read the minutes which were supplied to this committee, you will note that in the same minutes of March 2011, which announced the potential value of the scheme over 5 years, there was also further down that minute, a minute that there should be full transparency on the existence of this scheme. So I don't think there's there is no conspiracy.
And there wasn't, and that's the point.
Very good. I think we're not going to agree on this, but can I thank you very much for your time before us?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
We're going to have some more information from you, and we will be doing a joint report.
Thank you.
Very
very much.
Good time.